Perhaps you can hear me now. Okay, that's great. So at least we are up to some start. Yes, this. So previously, when I've done live streaming, YouTube recorded and kept a backup. So I think yes, this is going to be there. Yes, it will be there, but I'll share like once we are done with the class, I'll be sharing the link to the video, or maybe the same link that I posted earlier. So let me just um, get it here. For those of you who came in later, so I just want everybody to join if possible. So I'm just making the link available right now. Not download from FOL, but if you have some YouTube downloader or something like that, then you should be able to download the video. And if the video length is too high, so and then the size is high, then I won't be able to add it to FOL. So that's why I've been pasting only the links so far. Okay, anyways, I think we should proceed now. It's already been more than 15 minutes that we've been trying to figure this out. Okay, that sounds great. So now, to start with today's class, I'll be doing some basic introduction on what a Flexbox is. And in our previous cases, to make either a two-column layout or a three-column layout, what we had to do was create a sidebar, a main column, and a sidebar for basically three-column layout, right? And then the first part would be float left. So if, as an example here, so if I had to create a three-column layout, so that basically used to be uh, this, this, and this, right? So the div or the CSS for this would be float left, right? And the CSS for this would be float right, and the center content would have been adjusted automatically. Let's say that the width of this particular one is around, say, 25%, and again for the right, the width is 25%, and this being the main column. So what we had to do in this, for this to adjust on the left and the right, was basically give it a width of margin and left of maybe 27%, just so that we have a small gap as it's shown in the screen here. So if there was to be some gap, right, of maybe 2% on the left and another 2% on the right, so it would have been margin right 27%. So this basically would give us this three column layout. Okay, but when we introduce Flexbox, so everything is going to be easier in a sense that all of these can be put in a single container and arranged accordingly. So what you need to do is simply edit one property rather than editing multiple properties. So just to give you an slight example here, we have used two properties, specific properties for the left, two properties for the right, and for the center one property in which we are only using margin. But now to introduce Flexbox, this is one of the more efficient way to lay out, align, and distribute elements. And when I say distribute elements, it has to be only the child elements. So in this case, for example, this whole three divs must be enclosed in in a container. So let's say that we have it over here. Okay, so the orange color in here being the main container, and we have to put it something, all the elements inside of it. Only then you can apply flex properties. So in that case, we can align and distribute elements accordingly depending on what the parent div specifies it to be. And sizes are dynamic in a sense. For our responsive web design in our previous classes, what we have done was basically made everything in the percentage based, right? So whenever we set a width, it was like a certain percentage, like I demonstrated just now here, saying that the width is below to be 25%. And then whenever you would try to resize your browser window, then it would automatically adjust. Okay, now in case of Flexbox, instead of using width, you do not have to specify anything. Okay, you do not have to specify anything, so everything is taken care of by a single property, that is flex. And you do not need to use floats anymore. Okay, and this Flexbox or the Flexbox layout is a one-dimensional layout system, in which by that what I mean is that either you can make it in a horizontal way or you can make it in a vertical way. So if you were to make it and by default it's horizontal, meaning that you have in this structure, so one on the left and then the other one beside it, and then the other ones beside it. So if you add some more elements to it, so you can it can be guaranteed that the next element would be something somewhere over here. Okay, but on contrary to that, it depends on what property we specify. You can either arrange it on a horizontal way, or also you can arrange it in a vertical way. So you can even make it in this fashion. Let me just reduce the height of this. So you can arrange even in this fashion, depends on what property you define. Okay, so in this case, now this is column layer, column. Okay, either you can do it in a row or you can do it in the column. And it's responsive and mobile friendly, and that's why it has been introduced in CSS. And another thing that you need to understand is margin do not collapse. From our previous class before our midterms, what we studied was that margins, if you put like the top margin and the bottom margin, the highest margin would be safe, right? So if you had one margin, like a top margin, say that in this case, so you have a bottom margin for example. So let me just delete this. Bottom margin of say 20 pixels. I'm just doing in the pixel format just to make you understand. And in this case, you had top margin of 40 pixels. So when we talked about in the earlier classes, when we talk the margins, so the margin that we preserved would be the highest one, not like 40 plus 20, but instead only 40, right? So the margin here would have been only 40 pixels. And this is how the margin collapses in our normal layout. But in case of Flexbox, that is not going to happen. Okay, so if you specify margins, so it is going to be added on top of each other, right? And it's direction agnostic, meaning that you can define the direction on your own. So by default, as I said, it's horizontal layout, but you can even convert it to um, vertical layout as well. And this is most appropriate for small scale layouts. So meaning that if you are developing a high or like a big website containing a single page and then you have different elements like number of or hundreds of elements, then we would not suggest it would not be advisable to use Flexbox, but instead we can opt for something called grid layout that I'll be posting the video on later. But right now, for a small scale application or for like a simple web page, simple mobile friendly web page, um, rather than using the pixel based version, we can opt to use Flexbox. And also for your project, if you can use Flexbox, you can use. All right, okay. But and other things that we need to understand is that the main thing for a Flexbox is that the container, okay? So whatever is inside of that container can only be arranged depending on how much space is free on that. So in this case, what I say is you can see that the Flex container over here, that is the outer portion, outer rectangle there, and on it there are two items, Flex 1 and Flex 2. Okay, so basically how we can arrange is we can only arrange the items depending on the container. So right now the flex item 1 and flex item 2 is there, and to identify where to align, so in this case if we are going in a in a horizontal axis, then that is called the main axis, and if you are looking at the vertical axis, and then you are looking at a cross axis. Okay, so there are parameters to define how to arrange them. So we'll do that in the demonstration as well. But you can understand that if you are arranging in a main axis, then you can only do it for the main axis. If you are doing it for the cross axis, you can do it only for the cross axis. However, you can even mix and match different flex strategies. For example, either you can have a column or row, but you have to nest the containers on that. So what I mean by that will be more clear when I demonstrate this. Okay, so now yes, this will be archived and you will be able to view this on YouTube later. I'll post the link after we're done with the video. Okay, so now this is like the basic introduction of a Flexbox, and only thing that you need to understand is that all the items that you want to flex, or all the items that you want to make it flexible, must be contained in a container. So and now for the demonstration, I have given you I have attached a zip file where you can see a basic HTML file, and it's only like three columns. So three columns in the sense that there are three divs, okay? And again, in this case, we have a container. So this is basically going to be our Flex container. So and this items, so all the divs that I'm going to add it over here would be like the flex item. Okay, so I'm just commenting them out so that it's easier for you to understand. So for now what we have is a main container, okay, and three separate flexbox items. So we have these now. Now what we want to do is basically in the container, and depending on the container, like all the items, as I said, would depend on the container itself. As you can see from the spacing here, that this section includes three separate divs. And if you were to see the page right now, so I'm just going to open the page up now. So you can see that this is our layout right now. Okay, nothing else. We have given a width of maybe 1,000 pixels, So we have a width of, okay, we do not have a width here. So let's define a max width. Let's not do it here. So I'm going to program it for the 3 call, since that is the container, and this is basically whatever the ID over here, like the basic container. In 3 call, there I'm going to provide a max width of 1000 pixels and set a margin to 0 and auto. And by now you should be clear on what these things does, right? So max width basically means that no matter how big is your screen, it will limit the width to 1000. But if you reduce the size, then you can expect the width to shrink as well. So margin 0 auto, and if you look at the screen now, you should be able to see that the content has been centralized. Okay, just to make a proper view, I'm going to add a background here. So in background, let me just add it as white, and you should be able to see that this is our main content, right? And our next target would be like to make it a column 1, column 2, and column 3, so that it's a 3 column layout. So we want to replicate that what we have done in our earlier classes, but this time instead of using floats, we are going to use Flexbox. So, and there is some magic to it. Okay, you do not need to specify like float, as I said. What you need to do is simply use this property called display, and the only thing that you need to provide is this attribute here. So just set the property of display to flex, and then you'll see the magic happen here. Okay, so you can see that instead of 3 um, rows, you are seeing only 1 row, and each row the components have been in a 3 column now, and you can see that all the width are automatically adjusted. If you compare between the CSS, okay, so it's far more easier. The only thing that you needed to change was display flex, and you have everything 3 column layout set instead of using floats. So this is one of the magic of CSS, right? Now, and sometimes, like in our case, what we had done was set a different width in for different columns. So what we had was basically for a first column, which was probably going to be our left sidebar, we had a width of around 25%, and then the right sidebar, in this case it's column 3, it's like 25%, and then if you want the column 2 to be of 50%, so what you can do is basically divide it in 4 parts, right? So when you're telling that 50%, 25, and 25%, it's basically 4 parts in which 25% is 1 part. Okay, so if you want to do that, then you need to refer to this calls over here. Okay, and let me reiterate to you, these are the items that we want to refer to. Okay, these divs are the items. So in this case, that if I want to refer to the call, say example dot call 1. Okay, before that, let me just add another class here called border. Okay, so in the class here now in border, so I'm just going to apply 1px solid, sorry. Let me add it a darker tone. So what I've done here right now is basically add a class, and this we are having 2 classes in the same, and this is the property that is going to be common for all of these divs. Sorry. And now just let me make a view. save the HTML as well, and you should be able to see the three columns, right? And I'm going to provide a separate background color to them as well. So now for the individual classes, dot call one. So I'm referring in this by dot call one, I'm referencing to this particular div, and I want its background to be something of yellow, green, or okay. And so dot call 2, and I'm referencing here this particular div now, so I want that background to be some different color. And now dot call 3, in which case I'm referencing to this particular third column. You can see here call 3, and I'm going to provide a separate color here as well. You can either have a background color, or you can have a background, only background, or background color. So you should be able to see some difference here. And again, you can have any color that you want. So this I've done color so that there's a proper marking of where our column starts and where our column ends. And right now we do not have any spacing in here, so the border starts and then the font starts. Okay, so if you want to have some spacing, then the best thing to do is create some padding, right? And so you want padding for all of these divs. Okay, you want padding for all of these divs. So what you can simply do is here 3 call, if you want to refer to all the divs inside of the this container, so you can simply have as 3 call and then div. Okay, so in this case you can have a padding, let's say, of around 3%, 2% would be fine. So I'm applying this style to all of the divs that come inside of this 3 call. So if you add some more divs, then this particular attribute will be applied automatically. Okay, so just to see as an example here, so now you have a gap of 2%, 2%, and 2% at the bottom, right? Since like all the contents are the same for same number, like same amount, you can see that it's exactly the same height. But however, like if you increase let's say that if you increase the content for the second or for the third column, I'm just going to do it for the third column. I'm going to copy and paste. Okay, and it's nothing much. I'm just going copying and pasting this particular paragraph so that our third div has 3 paragraphs instead of 1. And so you can see now that the columns are automatically adjusted with the height of its greatest one. So in this case, the height is automatically adjusted to fit in the content, and the column 2 as well as the column 1 also has the same height. Okay, and this is what we had to do like when we did margin left, margin right, or the center content. But in this case, everything is adjusted automatically. Okay, and now what about like if you want to increase the width? So let's say that I want to increase the width for column 3 to be double of what it is currently. Okay, so in that case you need to use one separate property called flex. Okay, and in here what you need to understand is that what should be the property that should be defined in the container element, and what are the items that should be defined in the item elements. So you can see that these are the container items. Okay, let's say that flex items. So this call 1, call 2 and call 3 are flex items, and this call 3 is basically a flex container. Okay, so I'm not writing this comment outside because you might be confused with this 3 call div as well as the border. So this 3 call is the flex container, and the flex items are call 1, call 2 and call 3. So when we apply the display property, that should be in the container, not on the items. So on the items, you are controlling individual items in that case, whereas in the container you are controlling all the items that come inside of that container. So if you were to add another div here, so just copy and paste, then that would also automatically adjust. Okay, so I'm just going to copy it here, call 3, right, and let me add it to the first one. You do not have to do this one if you're following along with me. So I'm just to demonstrate what happens, like, so you can see that now again, like I pasted the column 3 at the beginning of the div, at the beginning of the container, and now it's automatically adjusted. So, and again, you are not providing any width to it, so everything is done automatically. So I'm just going to delete that back so that you have the original content. So this is what we should have after all the coloring and stuff. No, you do not have to use, but if you want to, you can. Georgia, okay, I hope that answers. So Flexbox will be a pretty easy thing to do, like if you're doing your project. It's like rather than doing a floating layout. Okay, now we are leaving all the floats and everything behind. So if you don't want to use it, you can leave it. So this project is basically how you can do a responsive web design. And so now that we have done the column, let's adjust some widths. Okay, so to adjust widths, rather than defining property called like CSS property called width, then for the flex we have something called flex. Okay, and then the value. So if you give a number here, so flex 1 is a default value, meaning it will occupy uh, exactly, not like in terms of unit, but like it will be distributed evenly. Okay, it would take even amount of widths. And again, flex 1. Okay, so if you resize, so it's going to resize along with it, so it's complete responsive. Okay, it's complete responsive. So this is one of the alternatives, as I said earlier. It's mobile friendly and responsive. No, you do not have to do redo with flex and grid. So if you are done with the project and the deadline is coming week, I mean this Saturday, so you do not need to convert it. Okay, so these are because we missed 1 week because of this incident, COVID. So we missed out on, like, we are 1 week late. So and then on this week I'll be covering some some extra stuff just to get us on track. You can do media on Flex as well, or you can do media on media queries on the on our previous cases as well. So that's not like there's not much change in this. So I'll show you how to do media on this as well. Okay. Do you mean using Flexbox? Come here. I think I can demonstrate this like 3 column to 2 column after this class as well. If you are referring to using a responsive web design like we have done in the percentage basis, but if you want to do it in the 2 column layout in this one, we can also use this Flexbox. But adjusting to 2 columns and 3 columns can be done in any ways. But Flexbox is, like I said, it's for responsive and easier way. Okay, so let's get back to our CSS now. And now that we have all of these items figured out, and when you add the flex 1, so that's basically our default value, as I said earlier. So this is not going to change anything. Okay, so this would be same. So you will notice that there is nothing change here. Okay, when you have the flex value as 1, because by default the values are 1. But right now if you change the third column to 2, so basically what we are doing is from the available space for the container, that is 3 call, we are dividing that into 4 parts, and out of the 4 parts the third column is going to occupy the two parts of that. So now if you just look at your screen, the browser, you should be able to see that the 3 is taking more space, double the width of whatever the column 1 and column 2 is taking right now. Okay, so that's what I said, like you do not need to specify a width like we used to. So you can simply use the property called flex. And again, um, just to be clear, so this flex property has to be used in the items, not on the container. In the container you are using display flex, and on the items you are using the flex with a number. So let's say that if you are using this flex to be 3, now what you're doing is, for the available space within the container, you are dividing it into 5 parts, and out of 5 parts you are specifying or allocating 3 parts of that 5 part to call 3, and you would be able to see the change here. Now in this case we can see that this column 3 is occupying 3 parts of that 5, right? Now, what we can do is, another thing that we can alter is the order of our HTML structure. Right now, the order for us is call 1 appears first, call 2 appears second, and call 3 appears third. So once you have done the HTML part, you wouldn't want to change it time and time again because it's troublesome. But if you have the flexibility of converting the order through CSS, that will be more efficient, right? So what we can do is, the other property I'm going to introduce now is called order. So let's say that uh, by default this is how the order is being allocated. Okay, so the other property in here is order 2 and order 3. Okay, so this is by default assigned because the first one to appear is call 1, the second one is call 2, and the third one is call 3. And by default the values assigned is call 1, 2 and 3. And if you look at the screen, if you look at the browser now, you wouldn't be able to see any changes. But if you were to play around with these orders, okay, so let me just switch the second column to order number 3, second column to order 3, and the third column to order 2. So we know that the third column is by far the largest with the highest amount of space, right? So when you change the order, so you can see now that the order has been changed. So column 3 is appearing second on our list. Okay, so this is what you can do by using Flexbox. So you do not need to change any HTML part. So far, only HTML thing that I've changed is adding 2 paragraphs to our column 3, and everything else is being done through CSS. Also the order. Now again, if you want this column 3 to appear at the beginning, you can do so by just changing the order here from 1 to 3 and the second column to be as 1. So in this case, call 2 is the first to appear, and call 3 is second to appear, and call 1 is third to appear. So let me just make it order 1 here, so that there's a bigger difference to see. Okay, so the biggest one should be appearing in the front, call 1 should be at the end, and call 2 at the center as it was by default. So you can see here call 3, call 2 and call 1, call 1 being order as 3. Okay, so these are basic introduction of what a flex box can do regarding the 3 column layout. Okay, so I hope I'm clear about these things so far, and the next thing that we'll be doing is arranging um, the layout like more on Flexbox itself, but we'll be looking at something called alignment, okay, and redistributing the spaces evenly. So for that, what I want you to do is create another section. So right now the main container is flex container as 3 call. So what I'm going to do now is inside of that section itself, okay, and I'm not going out of the section. In the same section I'm going to create another section. Okay, so this will be a nested section, and id equals to, I'm going to provide it as inner container, and I'm giving a number value 1 because we are going to create one more. Okay, so in this case this section is inside of the main section called 3 call, and in here I'm going to add some divs, name it as classes, blocks, or and I'm going to add an image here. So images are provided to you on the folder itself. So baby Yoda, okay, and I'm going to copy this 3 times, 2 more times, sorry, 2 more times, just to change the images, and I'm not going to change the CSS class like we have done in our previous case. So in our previous case we had separate columns and separate classes for each of the divs, but in this, just to demonstrate you, I'm not going to change it further, but I'm just going to change the image file names. So another one, say root, and the alt being true, and the other one is maybe what. Okay, so if you look at the HTML now, so you should see in this fashion here, right? And from our previous class we know that, like, if the images are being extended out of the context, so the best way for you to fit that image in the main context that you have introduced is by using a property width, and for that what you need to do is assign properties. So now, since we're done with the main flex container, um, okay, so start of inner container, by that I mean this part. Okay, so here now I'm going to reference the inner container. So and in this inner container one, I'm just going to add it as an empty for now. But what I want to do is I want to reference all the images of that inner container so that it fits in the divs that we have introduced them in, and img. So you want the width to be 100%. So now once you have set all the imgs, right, all the imgs to width 100%, so you should be able to see that all the images are accommodating in a same. And also, like, if you look at the original images, then you'll see that these images vary in sizes, but however now since we have enclosed it as 100%, so it's taking the maximum width it can take for that particular div. Okay, so now what it has become is, because it's this section is also a part, also a child of this 3 call. Okay, so that is also being taken as a flex item. So in this case this is also taken as a flex item, and then this is a separate column, right? So what we can do is now just remove or cut this from the main section where I have typed in and add it to the first div, sorry, the third div, but in terms of order we have added in the beginning. So what you'll be able to see is that the content now is being placed inside of the main container, right? So there you have it with 100%, and now you can even specify the width of this block elements as well, like how much width you want to specify. And as we have demonstrated earlier, so you do not need to provide width if you use the uh, flex. So what you need to do is simply again display flex, and you should be able to see that they are arranged automatically. Okay, they are arranged automatically in this case. So again, when we see that the flex, when we just display as flex, so it's going to take it in a horizontal fashion. If you want it to be on the vertical direction, so by using a flex, then even you can use as flex direction. Okay, so the container you can use as flex direction to be of either column. So if it's row, by default this is what is applied. So if I apply this here, you will not be able to see any changes on this element. And again, just to reiterate, so we are focusing on the inner elements, that is only on these three image blocks. So if you now from now on you'll be seeing changes only to these items, not anything else. So if I change it to column, so you can see now these are arranged in a column layout. Okay, that's no difference than what we have like if we had not used flex, but the only thing is that now you can change depending on the size here. Okay, so as you can see we have it here, right? Now let me just delete this part and have it normally. So what I want to do is now for each of the blocks, for each of the blocks items, I just want to give some backgrounds. So the class name here is block, and just provide a background of white and border so it's not it's up to you to choose what kind of colors do you want for the background and what kind of borders do you want. So I'm using a dashed, so just this will just give an example for us of a frame, like it'll be like a frame, so that as you can see here, so the border dashed. And now so some of the times it's not feasible like for us to see all the contents that are like attached to each other. Okay, so in order to have some space, okay, in order to use some space, we can define some other properties in a flex, and that property is basically flex basis. So you can either define a width. So if you are using width, so you can simply say that the width of maybe uh, 30%. Okay, and I'm applying this width to block element. So in this case, block is applied to three separate divs. So it's going to take like 30% of its parent div, in this case the inner container, right? So if you look at it now, you can see that it's taking 30%, but we do not see a much space. So let me just remove, make it as 20% so that you can see the difference. So you can see now that the 20% width, right? And then you have some space here. So you can either adjust that to have a space, take this space. And another thing that I wanted to introduce here was like introduce a spacing in between these two. So the normally in our previous cases, what we would do if we were not using flex boxes, we would add a margin on the left and on the right, okay, and then make it like presentable. So let's say that you have, so what we would do or in our earlier cases would be margin around maybe on the top, let's say 0, and on the sides let's say 4% or 5%. So there you have it, right? So you can either do this, but when you use a margin, you have to calculate the amount of space that you need to assign. So in this case, it's not even. So if you look at the left space and then the right space you have more empty, space, whereas on the left you have fewer empty space, right? So the width is not calculating, like you have to do math on how you want everything to be distributed exactly. But in case of Flexbox, so the beauty of using Flexbox is that you do not need to take care of what, or you do not need to take care of math. Okay, so instead of using these property, what we are going to introduce is um, one called flex spaces, and this is a substitute of width in case of Flexbox. Okay, so in this case now, if you just do 20%, again, it's the same as when we use the width of 20%, but if you want to if you want to distribute them, okay, if you want to distribute them evenly, then what you can do is um, in your container, okay, in your container, you can use another property called justify dash content, and this is how you can distribute. So these are the properties that you can use to distribute. Okay, so in this case, if you use let's say that you want it to be space between. So what it basically means is that you want to have equal spaces in between each of the items. So if you want a space between these two divs, these three divs, so you can use space between. And so if you look at the page now, see that how the content is been distributed exactly, and then you have exact amount of space in between 1 and 2 and 2 and 3, right? But in case of margin, when we use the margin, what was the issue was we had some little portion of gap on the left and then huge portion of gap on the right. So Flexbox negates that. Using Flexbox is better in that sense. Okay, and also you can try different ways. For example, let's say that if instead of using a space between, I use start, or let's say that I use flex start. Okay, so you can see that this is applied by default. And when we talked about earlier in next demonstration, so container, whenever you say that flex start, you are starting at this point from the main, and whenever you are saying flex end, so you are saying the end of this. Okay, so when you are distributing it from the flex start, so you are starting from the left, and when you are distributing from the right, so you are starting from the right. So let me just change it to flex end, and you should be able to see that your content or the images to start from the right. Okay, so for us basically if you are using, then I suggest that you use mostly around uh, space evenly is also better, and space between. Okay, so space between, you have enough space. And also if you wanted like the margin that we have used, we can also use space around, so that will leave some spaces in out of the border so that you have even space that you can use like margin. Okay, so this is like a centralized content as well. So you can try out different things or different properties, attributes in here. But basically what you need to understand is that justify content is a property that is to be defined in a container, not on the items. Okay, so so far what we have done is on the container side we have used a display flex and justify content. But in case of um, individual items or the flex items, we have used flex spaces and flex and order. So you need to distinguish between which property to use for the container and which to use for the items. So that will be the one of the main confusing part when you are using Flexbox. But if you get used to that, then it's quite easier for you to handle things about responsive web design for a simple application, right? And now what I want to do is like copy multiple items. So when I said the flex box, if it's arranged horizontally, okay, I'm just copying the same items again and again. So what would you naturally happen is that it is trying to add as many items as it can fit on that particular line. Okay, so it's not creating a separate line or it's not creating a separate row, but everything is being fit in the same row. And how we can get rid of that is like if you want, for example, depending on the content, if it has to be viewable, then what you can do is you can simply create or you can simply add another option that is also in the container. Okay, that is also in the container called flex wrap. So when you do a flex wrap and the option being wrap, okay, so you are telling the browser to code it as whatever the space is there, it doesn't fit, then you go and move on to the next line. So again, if you resize these elements, okay, so you can see that that item is wrapped. And also if I increase the size, let's say that I increase the size of it to flex basis to maybe 30%. Flex basis to 30%, and you should be able to see the changes here. Okay, so it's being wrapped. But and now to have the gaps in between, for example the top and the bottom, so there is no property that you can do with flex, but you can, only the thing is that you can use margin. And as we've suggested earlier, in case of margin it's not collapsible, so whatever the addition of multiple um, divs would be, so that will be that there. So in this case, let me just say that the block margin bottom is of maybe 4%. So you can see now the content is being distributed. Okay, so you can do it in this fashion if you want to wrap. And also let me just try out 25%. So this looks even much better now. 25%, right? So I hope you are clear by what I mean by this wrap as well. And again, the main thing that you need to distinguish is which one of the properties is for the container and which one is for the. And again, now the other term that I want to introduce is called align items. And in case of align items, it is basically what you have, like if you have used tables or anything on Microsoft Word, so you can align in from the top, from the bottom, or distribute evenly. So that is the basic concept of the flex itself, right? So what you can do is, if you use a property called align items here, and this is also a property that is to be used in the container itself. So if you do align items and make it as flex start, and again flex start is at the top left corner, so you can see there's nothing change. But as you can see, the second image is smaller. So when you do a flex end, so what happens, let's see what happens there. So you can see that now it is being arranged from the bottom of the text. Okay, so from the bottom of the entire row rather than from the top. You can see that there is a small gap at the top. It's because we have aligned them from the base. Okay, and to make it center, so to align all the contents as center, so what you can do is simply use center, and then you have it here. So you have a small gap at the top, small gap at the bottom, and everything is aligned in from its center axis. So you can even do in this fashion with align items. So this is basically how you can use flex to distribute the objects evenly and to align the items depending on your choice, right? So this is basically some introduction, and the next thing that we are going to do is, like, if you remember from our previous class when we tried to do centralized content. So as an example here, so when you create a box, right, and then you want the text or anything to be centered, so what we had to do was we had to define the height of that div, and then you had to assign the line height of this font inside of that div the same height as that of the div. So how you can do that easily in case of flex. Okay, so in case of flex, that's easier to do. So what you basically need to do is, again, for the sake of it, I'm just going to create another container. So right now what we have is the main container, and inside of this we have inner container 1, and I'm going to create another inner container that is section id equals to inner container 2, and again I'm going to create a div class of box and just write in hello. Okay, so the appearance right now without any CSS4, that is um, here. So hello, I'm at the center. Right now it's not centered, but how can you do that to be as a center? So let's look at that. Okay, so before we want to make it as a center, so you want to set the height of this container itself. Okay, so what I'm going to do is for I'm just going to add it here. So start of inner container 2, and in this one, so hash inner container 2, and they give a height of maybe around 400 pixels or something like that. Okay, and I'm just going to give a background color. Okay, slate blue. And for the box, I'm just going to give a border 1px. So the content is basically in this fashion here. So right now it's not at the center, and then we have provided the height, and this basically is the dotted border that I have provided. You can see here, right? Now in order to make this content at the center, what you can do is in your main container, in your inner container, so you can specify the margin to be auto, right? So right now we do not see any change, and to fix that, or what you need to do is first of all display as flex. Now let's see what if there is any change. So once we have display as flex, now it's taking the space, some space on that, right? So we have this space is empty. So what we can do now is if you assign the margin as auto in the container element itself. Okay, so you have to assign a margin of so display as flex for the main container and margin as auto for the your div element. Then you can see that the content is being centralized. Okay, so that's very easy to do. Now if you add some contents, so if you remember, like I told you when in our previous classes, so that technique of applying our height and the line height for the text element works basically for one line elements, but if you do it here, if you add multiple lines to it, so it's again it's going to be a breeze. So it's going to be very easy in this case. So you can see that the content is centered from height, right? So if you wanted this content to be centered, then what you can do is just give it a width, okay, and make it center, like text line center would work if you want to do it horizontally. But our main issue was how to make the content align vertically. You could have used vertical align as well, but it's not it doesn't work as you expect it to be. And the best case scenario for us to work with that is by using a flexbox and treating them as margin of auto. Okay, so the a parameter that you need to have is display as flex for the main container, and for the items on that container you can keep it as margin auto. So if I were to again copy and paste this code, so we know that the flexbox, now we have another item for that container, so now it's going to divide. Okay, so it's going to divide that space, and you can see that there are two boxes, and then you have both of them aligned vertically at the center. um, I hope this has been clear, and you can get back to this video again after it's been published. So it'll take maybe around an hour or so to get for it to be published. Okay, but if you have any questions regarding the Flexbox, you can ask me. I think we're done for the demonstration part for today. So basically what I'll be doing for the next demonstration, not the demonstration, but like a video, I'll record a video on grid layout. I'll do a demonstration and then post the video maybe by tonight or by tomorrow. Okay, so grid is a two-dimensional version, whereas this layout is one-dimensional. It can be horizontal or vertical. Okay. And again, if you wanted to align this as vertical, so if you wanted this to appear on the next line, next row, then what you need to do is basically use flex direction here. Just say it as column, and then you'll have it other way around. Okay. And again, like if you wanted to, for example, if you wanted this column 1 to come at the beginning, so you can again always change the order. So it's like everything can be controlled through CSS now that we have Flexbox. But the only thing that need to find is, so column 1 has to be order 1 and column 3 has to be order 3, sorry, uh, 2, so that I want this column, bigger column, to be at the center and this to be column order 3. So there you have it, your left sidebar, your right sidebar, and your center content. The only thing I changed is the order. So I think that's it for the class. For the CSS, which part of the CSS would you want to see? So only CSS would be which one did you wanted to see, Tanker, Venom? Oh, okay. So I hope you are all clear about Flexbox. The bottom part. Okay, this is for the start of inner container 2. And again, remember that you only need to use this. You do not even have to have margin auto here as well. So again, you can make use of this discussion as well if you have any doubts. Okay. And apart from that, I think we're all set for today's lecture. So I'll be posting a lab and then the introduction of how you can do the lab as well on this Flexbox and CSS Lens by tonight. So then you'll have some time to do that, complete and submit. So I think that's all for today. And if you have again any doubts on the projects, or if you have any doubts regarding the Flexbox, you can ask me now. The only concern, like when you have to be concerned about the Flexbox, is like which property to use in um, the container and which to use in the items itself. So there's, I think I posted a link on layouts, sorry, on the, sorry. So I posted a link on guide to Flexbox. Okay. So if you follow the link, then you can even see like which properties are to be applied to the parent or the container and which properties are applied to the items. So you can see that the parent, whichever you are seeing in this purple color on the left column, is basically for the parent, and whichever you are using on the items or whichever the items of the div container itself, so you can use that. And um, when you try to use this flex grow, so it might be a bit confusing, so it may not be able to figure that out eventually. So if you need help, you can let me know. Okay, so this is basically how you want to adjust depending on the availability of the space. So when the lab will be due will be next week, before this today's class. So it will be 8th of April around 12 p.m. But I still have to post it, so I'll be posting it today. Okay, and it will not be complicated. And if you have any doubts, you can ask me. So these are basically so instead of using flex grow, so better to use flex, where you can simply define that. And align, so I haven't talked about this align self. So we have talked about align items, and that we have used in the container itself, not on the um, item. So you can do this. So these are basically, and again the by default everything is stretch for us. So you can look through this guide, and it will be very helpful for you as well. Okay, and you can try out different things, even like if you are done with the lab. And I do not suggest that you do redo the lab using Flexbox, but if you want to practice Flexbox, then that is one way to go. Okay, but if you have already completed, submitted the labs by using our float layout, by using a floating layout, you do not need to change it to Flexbox. Okay. So guys, thank you for joining, and I hope you have understood the basic concepts here. And the next video I'll be posting again would be about the grid layout, which will be a bit more complex than um, Flex, because we are moving from like one dimension to two dimension. Okay, eventually you'll be able to do everything in a responsive way. Okay, so thank you guys, and again let me know if you have any doubts. You can email me, you can post in the discussions, and I'll post this Flexbox start. Let me just save it. Okay, thank you guys. I'm going to end the stream now. You have the Flexbox end, the start HTML files, and then the end HTML files. You can have a look at it. You can practice on your own. Okay, and again, let me know if you have any doubts. Thank you, and bye. Stay safe, everyone.